Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. This is episode number 34, and it is a sad one because yesterday we got official news from the team that Nico Freire has a torn ACL and is going to miss the rest of this season. But we did win 6 out of our last 7 games. It's a positive time for the team, if not marred by that note. And we're going to talk all about Nico Freire's injury, what it means for the team in this episode. But before we do all of that, as always, I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur. How you feeling tonight, man?
Not great after that news over the weekend. A bit of a dampener on our great form that we've been on. It's a good thing that we've racked up a fair few points over the last couple of games, because it seems like we're going to be in a bit of a trouble.
Yeah, we'll talk all about the defense because it's been good, and it would have been the type of thing that you would have loved to see that defense just go game after game after game after game for a while with maybe a little bit of rotation mixed in. But that being your primary setup, I think we were both feeling pretty comfortable with that back four, or at least the back three with either left back. Yeah, so we'll get into it. We'll talk about some of the other options on defense. We'll talk about maybe what the team can do this summer. We'll talk about Leo Campana and what his role on this team is after his game-winning goal in the extra time on Saturday night. And, maybe a couple other things as we get there. But I want to start with the Copa America. As we've known for a long time, this summer is going to be one where we play a lot of games and we might be missing some players. We've, over the last couple of days, gotten the trickle in of news about which players have made, granted, the preliminary rosters for those summer tournaments, both the Euros and Copa America. And it seemed like the news is as good as it could be up until this point. The U.S. men's national team released their preliminary roster. And by the way, these are preliminary rosters and rosters for the friendlies leading up into these tournaments. But in all likelihood, the final selection for these tournaments are going to be based out of these rosters. The U.S. men's national team released their roster. Drake Callender not on it. Not a huge surprise. He hasn't been in great form. And also, I don't think it makes a ton of sense to take a player like Drake Callender away from Inter Miami for a month if he's just going to be the number 3 goalkeeper. Instead, that goes to Sean Johnson, which I thought was funny because even though he is an MLS and even though he is going to be away from his team for a month, it's Toronto FC. And clearly the U.S. men's national team doesn't care about the Canadian clubs as much as they care about the American clubs. So we'll keep Callender for the summer. And I do think that's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. I think we all expected that, especially because he hasn't been in great form, and even if he did get selected, he would have been third choice for the U.S. men's national team. So even if he did get selected, I'm not sure if he would have gone himself. Great to finally figure out one position that we're not going to lose out a player on. He's had a bit of a topsy-turvy start to the season. A few games where he's been absolutely phenomenal. A few games where he's cost us the games. Monterrey comes to mind. So it's been up and down, and I just want him to hit a good patch of form where we can go back to saying that, yes, Drake Callender is not a problematic position for us at all, and we know exactly what to expect from that goalkeeping position. He's been good over the last couple of games, though, and I'm just glad that we get to keep him because the drop-off from him to Dos Santos is a little bit too much than I would prefer. So for me, keeping Drake Callender for the next few games is going to be very, very important.
Yeah, last season he became the first keeper in Inter Miami history to go pole to pole as the number 1. Nick Marsman did get a start in the U.S. Open Cup, but that was just giving your backup a run in the Cup. And then we saw Dos Santos for the first time in the final game of the season when it's just to mix it up to give the guy an opportunity who's been training for you all season. We did see Dos Santos earlier this season because Callender was called up to the U.S. men's national team in the March window. But I believe this Copa America timeframe is the last time that international duty will interfere with MLS games this season. And so it's in all likelihood Drake Callender until the end of the season. assuming nothing crazy happens at that position in terms of incomings. Likewise, Ukraine announced their preliminary roster, and Sergei Kristov not on it. He was a mainstay for that team last season, and this season he hasn't been called up once in 2024. And suddenly, that is a big deal for this Inter Miami team to keep Kristov throughout the summer. You're on mute. Sorry.
Absolutely massive. We lost our starting centre back in Nico Freire. We need Christoph to fire on all cylinders now. I don't know what our solution is going to be. We're going to talk about it in a bit. But it's all likelihood is that Christoph is going to be the starting centre back for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 7 to 8 games. And if he had gotten called up to international duty, the likelihood would have been that we would turn back to a 3-5-2, and nobody wants to see that. Or we have Ian Frey come in, but I'm not sure how fit Ian Frey is to be able to start game in and game out for us. So the fact that we need to have Christoph available, fit, and playing well is imperative. And yeah, I think it's a blessing in disguise that he hasn't been called up by Ukraine.
And then lastly, this isn't a surprise, but we did get the Argentine team, and Lionel Messi is in it. We've known all along that Messi will be gone for this tournament, assuming he's healthy. And so, that's not a surprise. One that we haven't got yet, and this to me is the make or break decision, is from Paraguay, which would impact both Matias Rojas and Diego Gomez, just based on Diego Gomez's, recovery from injury. It doesn't seem like he's really in play. That tournament starts in less than a month from today. So I don't really know if he's in play for them for that tournament. But Matias Rojas might be. Hopefully not. But if he isn't, and we get a Paraguay roster that doesn't include Gomez or Matias Rojas, we've got to feel great about our team this summer. I know we're not going to have Messi, but we'll have everyone else. I don't even think anyone else is really even in consideration, at least in my head.
Yeah, I would love to see Matias Rojas actually play in this team without Messi, because I think he can get a run out on this team where he can be that primary creator, that player who has not the same level of impact, of course, but a similar sort of a role as Lionel Messi. And for me, it would be so important to have him in the team when Messi is out, because he can finally get a good run out in that right wing position and maybe show what he's all about. Essentially, that was one of the reasons that we bought him as well. We were lacking in that right wing side. We needed a little bit of cover. So if we lose Matias Rojas, that sort of takes away a little bit of our creativity. And for all intents and purposes, most of the responsibility for that role would be then Julian Wressel's. And we haven't been entirely convinced by his ability to do that. So losing Matias Rojas and losing Lionel Messi is going to be absolutely devastating for our front line. But let's hope for the best and hope for the most positive outcome here. I agree with you. I don't think Diego Gomez is going to get called up. He's still a couple of weeks away from even coming back into the squad, let alone the starting 11. And it might be a little bit touch and go for him to miss out. As bad as it is for him, for Inter Miami, that's going to be great, because we need his level of athleticism back in the midfield. Having him, Redondo, and Matias Rojas fit and running would potentially make me at least feel very secure about our chances without Lionel Messi.
Yeah, it feels like, our offense could really use Matias Rojas when Messi's not here. Now, granted, we did see that exact situation last Wednesday at Orlando, and it didn't provide a ton of offense. So, maybe he would be a blessing in disguise. But this is a player that we've already seen has real talent and can be a difference maker and a goal scorer if he's put in the right situation. And so hopefully this summer he's going to have a nice long run of games for us, and he can get comfortable and find his role, and we can continue to win games even without Lionel Messi in the team sheet. That's it for now in terms of the Copa America situation. We have kind of thought over the last couple months that it might not be as bad as we may have thought in January or last season, because that huge list of internationals we had last year has seemingly dwindled down to Lionel Messi right now, and some kids that are going to go to the Olympics and the youth national teams, but not the same level as what we saw last year, where in the September window we had like 11 call-ups or some crazy number like that. Israel Boatwright, another guy for the Dominican Republic that I'm very confident will go to the Olympics, but has not been an impactful player for Inter Miami this year, so it doesn't really hurt as much. Okay, let's talk about Nico Freire. We found out Saturday night after the game that Tata said it looks like it might be serious. So, we're all hoping that he pulls through and is okay. Sunday, we got an Instagram post for Freire making it sound like it was really bad. And we did talk about it in the post-game show, but we still weren't entirely sure what it was. We didn't know how long he would be out. And that was our post-game show. We were talking about the game from Saturday night. So this is our chance to really dive deep into our center back situation, Nico Freire as a player, and what he did for this Inter Miami team. And then what we can do to replace him and get back to having this defense that we feel really good and comfortable with. So let's start with Nico Freire, the player. He's played 14 games for this team, 13 starts. We brought him in January to be our number one veteran center back, left-sided, good in the air, to help us on set pieces, a guy that we felt, just in the pregame show on Saturday night was going to be helpful in defending a guy like Christian Benteke. And over the last month, he's really seemingly turned on another gear and become an excellent player for us. So what are your thoughts on Freire, and how big of a blow is this just off the bat?
First of all, when he posted that Instagram post and that photo with that caption, it was very ominous. I think both of us speculated that this potentially is a season-ending injury. I'm really, really upset with the fact that he has to go through this, and I feel really sorry for him because this could potentially mean the end of his Inter Miami career. So unfortunate, very, very unfortunate. At the time when I first saw the injury, I didn't think it would be that bad, but it turns out it's an ACL tear. I'm not sure what the grade of the tear is, but obviously it's probably high up. And very, very big loss in terms of what it means for the team going forward into the season. As Nico Freire, for the player that he is, he first came in, we all thought that we need a center back. And as far as I remember, he wasn't the first choice center back that we got in. He was, I think, second or third on the list. And when he first came in, he was carrying an injury, so it took a bit of time for him to slot in. And I wasn't fully convinced by the kind of player that he was in terms of his ability to lead that back line. And over the few games that we've played together, over a chemistry being built between Avilés and Nico Freire, he'd got much better. He showed game after game why he is the defender that we got. Our defense has improved so much over the last few games, whether that's by virtue of us changing from the 3-5-2 into a consistent 4-3-3, whether it's the chemistry being developed between the back four. I thought Nico Freire was becoming the key centerpiece for that defense and that back four. Avilés was performing a lot better next to Nico Freire, and just generally it seemed like we were a lot more sound, a lot more composed, a lot more working as a unit. And this injury couldn't have come at a worse time, because it just upsets all that rhythm that we've set up over the last few games, and now we're back to the drawing board. I know Christoph is experienced. He has performed decent when he's been brought on to fill that role. But is he going to be able to perform to that same level? I'm not sure. I hope he can slot in immediately and have that same level of consistency and that solidity in his performances as Nico Freire was bringing. So for me, this couldn't have come at a worse time, to a worse player, and to our defense as well, which has already been a weak part of our game. It's just really, really sad.
So he is on loan from Pumas, technically. It was a 1-year loan deal. He's 30 years old now. He turned 30 in February, so by the start of next season, he will be 31. It doesn't feel like a player that Inter Miami is going to go out and spend money on to buy out and buy from Pumas. You're talking about making him a DP and him having more of a cap charge than Busquets and Suarez and stuff. So it feels to me like this is the end of Nico Freire as an Inter Miami player. It's always possible that they can loan him back, but I don't see it. I think that Inter Miami will have more options next offseason, and I think that even this summer they'll have options that might make bringing a guy like Freire back kind of redundant. And so I hate to say this, but I do think it's the end of Nico Freire as an Inter Miami player. I'm sure he'll still be with the team while he recovers, just because South Florida is not a bad place to do a recovery from an injury and being around.
Except when it goes for that 45 minutes.
What you just be inside during that 20 minutes. You get a sense of when to go inside for the rains, but
he'll just carry an umbrella at all time.
Well, you have to. It's South Florida. I mean, come on. Yeah. So yeah, a guy that I think they brought in really wanting to help solve their set piece issues, which was a huge problem for them last season, and it did carry in a little bit to the beginning of this season, but it's seemingly improved as Freire has become more comfortable and established himself as a force. And then you mentioned it, his relationship with Toto Aviles has become something really stout and impressive, and something that we haven't seen from a center back pairing in Inter Miami in quite some time. And so there was a lot to get excited about, and it was seeming like he was going to have a big season. And so to lose him like this, it's devastating. It's gut wrenching, and for him as a player, of course, and you feel bad for him. But for the team now, we have to think about replacing him, both in the short term and in the long term. We'll talk about the long term and what they can do in the summer window, but let's start with the short term. We have a game Saturday night against Vancouver. That game is late, by the way. It's 7:30 West Coast time, so it's going to be 10:30, 10:40 Eastern. I'm assuming we're going to see Christoph and Aviles as the starting center back pairing. There are a couple other options that probably are worth mentioning. Ryan Saylor is the next center back up beyond those two. Noah Allen, we've seen play some center back for this team. And then we also saw Sergio Busquets sit back there once. Not sure we loved that, but those are like the three options, right? Noah Allen is left-footed, and so he gives you that positional balance. But I think maybe you'd rather have the experience and depth of talent that you get from Christoph, just at least to start and see if it works. Is that what you expect to see Saturday night?
I think the most obvious solution at this point in time is Christoph, right? He's obviously the backup, second choice. He's going to plug in straight away. It's just a matter of how consistent he can be and whether he can stay fit or not, because obviously he's also on the older side of the age bracket. So I'm not sure if we can expect him to play 7-8 games, game in, game out, every single one of them. So I think for this weekend, especially for the short term, we're going to see Christoph partner up with Aviles. In terms of the slightly longer term, I'm not sure what the plan's going to be. You didn't mention one option, and that is changing formations and using a 3-5-2 with Aviles as the centerpiece and maybe Wiegand and Noah Allen or Negri as the left center back and right center back. I'm not sure how viable that option is, but that could potentially be the last case scenario. But I think for the meantime, as long as Christoph and Ryan Saylor are fit, we might see them alternate, or maybe even Christoph plug in into as many games as he potentially can play over the next few.
Well, there is one option that I didn't mention yet, and we will talk about the midterm, basically up until the summer signing window starts, which is sort of the middle of July, and players would be eligible for the start of the Leagues Cup is basically when guys would be first available. And that's Ian Frey. And I want to come back to him in a second because that's an interesting conversation in and of itself. I have seen some people mention that Ryan Saylor is an interesting player and maybe they would prefer him over Kristoff. How does that hit your ears?
Listen, he hasn't put too much of a foot wrong when he's been asked to play, right? He's been okay. A couple of games that he had to fill in when both Kristoff and Freire were out. I think Aviles was out in one of those games. Ryan Saylor looked okay, but this is what I'm trying to say. It's different playing one game in 4 and performing well in that one game, and it's different playing 4 games consecutively every weekend and performing at a high level. Because at the end of the day, Ryan Saylor hasn't played that many games for Inter Miami over the last year. He hasn't, or at least this season, and he hasn't been consistently asked to perform a role. Yes, he comes off the bench, gives us that option, plugs in one of those games, but playing week in, week out regularly at a high level against teams with different solutions and different problems that they throw at you, it's not easy. So I'll have to reserve my judgments and comments about Ryan Saylor once I see him perform more consistently. But I think I would prefer Kristoff as of now. And then if Kristoff doesn't perform up to the mark and the first time he makes a mistake, ask me that question again, because I'm sure my answer is going to change.
I've watched every minute virtually of Ryan Saylor's professional career, and I've watched virtually every minute of Sergei Kristoff's Inter Miami career. And I will just tell you, they're not in the same tier of talent in terms of what they can do as a center back. And I want to give Ryan Saylor credit because I think he's been better this year than he was last season. He was a little mistake prone last season. So I do think he's improved, and I think that's awesome. And like you said, it's nice to have a center back that you feel comfortable with off the bench. But Kristoff is making 10 times the pay that Ryan Saylor's making, and he's making that because he's proven himself and is very experienced at a high level, and he's a good quality center back. And we don't love, we don't love Kristoff as an athlete. We don't love him as playing a high line, but he is good on the ball. He is a good, solid veteran center back. And some of the reasons that we really weren't comfortable with him back there, Inter Miami has improved upon. We don't turn the ball over in the midfield as much, and we don't give them as many, transition opportunities like we had been. Maybe that was because of Nico Freire and that back line building chemistry. I'm not putting that away, but still, we haven't been exposed in those ways quite as much. And so you can imagine that Kristoff could fit in relatively comfortably. He doesn't provide the presence that Freire did. I think we really started to see him become a physical sort of bulldog back there, where he kind of established himself physically as a presence for other, the opposing team to deal with. And I don't think Kristoff brings that, but he is an improvement as a passer on both Aviles and Freire. And so, there are positive aspects to him. And I do think he's going to get the first crack on Saturday night to take this spot and see if he can run with it. So I think that's sort of the answer to the Saylor versus Kristoff question. But beyond that, Sergio Busquets, Noah Allen, you think either of those guys are in play for center back?
Sergio Busquets, I think that's probably going to be the last-ditch option. You don't want to take away your central midfielder, the key engine in your midfield, and put him in defense, and then leave yourself vulnerable in the center, right? He was okay. I'm forgetting which game he was playing center back as, and I don't remember what the scoreline there was, but I don't remember him being awful at the center back position. But again, it's a whole different ball game when you have to play that role week in, week out. When you put Sergio Busquets in the defense, you absolutely lose out on your ability to create from a deep role. You lose out on your main playmaker who can link up with Messi. And I think long-term, that's going to hurt your team in terms of creating chances. So that would potentially be the last-ditch solution that I'd employ if Ryan Saylor's out and if Sergio Kristoff's out. Noah Allen, maybe in a back three, but I don't see him playing as an out and out centre back. But you never know what's on Tata's mind. As much as I think I know Tata, I don't think he's going to use Noah Allen in that sole back four.
Yeah, we are playing a very good Vancouver team. They've been one of the better teams in MLS so far, and we're going to be on the road. And that just doesn't feel like putting him in a back two, even though he's left-footed. That doesn't feel like you're putting a young player in a position to succeed, which is probably why Tata is going to do it. But I agree with you on Sergio Busquets. I don't think that's a very realistic option. I did look it up. He was in the back line against NYCFC with Ryan Saylor. Both Christoph and Freire were unavailable for that game, and so Saylor and Busquets manned the back line. I kind of remember us in the pregame show thinking,
"This is
what is happening."
That was a death sentence. Hey, we didn't lose that game, did we?
No, we should have won that game, but
there you go.
Their goalkeeper, Matt
maybe that's your solution. Brian Saylor and Sergio Busquets.
Maybe. And then I think the other thing to consider is who's going to partner well with Aviles, who's also stepped up lately and become a really, really good center back. And he's the sort of young player with high potential that you kind of expected to grow into one of the better center backs in the league. And it feels like he's taken steps towards being that. And so you want to make sure you give him a partner that he's comfortable with and that he isn't going to derail his game. And that's why I think Christoph, as a veteran who has seen everything, is a guy that you might want back there. And then lastly, it feels like over the past month or 6 weeks since the Monterrey game, and we sort of started focusing on the MLS, it feels like Christoph is the only, Freire, Christoph, and Aviles are the only center backs we've really seen, just because they've all been healthy. And, even when one goes down or needs a rest or Aviles had a suspension, they just went with the next guy up between those three. So it feels like that's Tata's sort of decision-making now.
Yeah, and I think the last time that we saw Sergei Christoph was against Montreal when we won 3-2 away from home, and that's when he started, I believe. I think we conceded 2 goals very early, if I'm not mistaken, in that game.
Yeah, that was a week and a half ago. That was we got beat in transition twice in the first half because our fullbacks were playing super high up. And then we fixed it in the second half. They sat back and the defense was good. That was when Aviles had the yellow card suspension.
And that's that doesn't feel like a week and a half ago. That feels like a lifetime ago. Whether that's to do with my memory or just how many games we played in the last few weeks, I'm not sure. But that just goes to show you need to set up this defense now to succeed. You can't do things on the pitch that will expose this backline and expose the lack of pace in this backline. For me, the biggest problem with Sergei Christoph that I personally see is his ability to defend with pace, especially when we are in defensive transitions. He no longer has the ability to keep up with some of the pacey attackers. So if you put him up against someone like Paintsel, he's probably going to get rinsed. And then maybe his ability in the air is not as good as Nico Freire. But let's be honest, he's a good centre back. He's a very, very good centre back. There was a moment in the season where I remember you preferred him over Nico Freire when Nico Freire wasn't showing the levels that he eventually showed us. So for me, there's a very, very good centre back here. And yes, there might be a little bit of drop off in terms of pace and in terms of aerial ability, but otherwise I think Sergei Christoph will be able to do a job here. The only issue that I personally have is how fit he can stay, because fitness is a major issue and we don't necessarily have anyone else anymore. Even if Aviles goes off or Christoph goes off, we don't have a direct replacement, and that's when we're floundering for options and solutions.
Yeah, you're right about Christoph. He does get injuries. He's already missed 7-game stretch this season because of a lower body injury. I just looked it up. Him and Aviles have started 6 games together, but only 2 as part of a center back partnership. The other 4 were part of a back 3. And those two were the first 2 games of the season before Nico Freire really got into the starting lineup against Real Salt Lake and the LA Galaxy. So they have played together, but it's been quite a while, and they don't have a ton of experience playing with each other. But I think we've talked ourselves into that being the right decision for at least this game to see how it looks. Let's talk about the medium term, because we do have an exciting young prospect at that position that is on the way back, and that's Ian Frey. Sunday night, we mentioned this in our post-game show, but he was scheduled to play for Inter Miami 2, who played Sunday night against a team from Carolina. And he did come off the bench, and he played about 30, 35 minutes, and he got an assist. And by all accounts, he looked athletic. He looked good. And so he looks like he's back. I know he has a long history record and maybe isn't someone we want to rely on multiple times a week, but this injury does feel like it's going to open up the space for him to, maybe not this weekend, but in the medium term, get a real run as a center back. And I think Tata, he only got to coach him twice last season before that injury, but it felt like Tata really saw bright things in Ian Frey. And so I think that he still has that in the back of his mind, and he's going to give him an opportunity in the next couple of weeks to be a real starter.
Yeah, this just opens up a door for Ian Frey for sure. What my concern is that for the player's sake, don't rush him back. Give him a few minutes here, a few minutes there, then slowly build up his involvement in the first team, because this player is coming back from 3 ACL injuries and he needs to be managed properly. So just because the team is lacking on options, because the team is a little bit thin in that back line, you can't just throw a player on for the sake of filling that role. So for me, as much as I would love to see him get a consistent role and maybe eventually be a starter for this team, I think it's a responsibility that Tata and the coaching team has for the player to make sure they manage his minutes correctly, because you can't sacrifice the player's long-term health just for short-term success for the team. So for me, I completely agree with you. This is a player that I'm very excited about. This is a player who's definitely going to get opportunities going forward now that Nico Freire is out, but also somebody that we need to manage properly and make sure that we do his career justice, because if he picks up another injury, it's not going to be great.
Well, they said the same thing last year, and here he is having had that extra injury and then coming back, and at least so far, so good. Listen, this is a kid that they've had for a long time in the program. He's an academy player, a homegrown signing, local kid. They are going to take care of him as to the best of their ability. Granted, Inter Miami doesn't have the best medical team in terms of preventing injuries, but they're not going to do anything unnecessary to, risk him. But it does feel like he's a guy that could play once a week. Like, it feels like that could be an option, and you rotate him and whatever, but avoid turf. But yeah, we play Vancouver this weekend. I don't think he's going to be available for that game because it is a long road trip, and also I think they have like a artificial hybrid turf. But we do play Atlanta United next Wednesday. That feels like a game he might get some minutes off the bench. But we'll see. The first signs from that IMCF2 game are good. And the reason we want to bring him up is because he could be a potential option over the next 6 or 7 weeks until the next window opens, which actually is about 8 or 9 weeks away. So, and he's an exciting player that I think if you do see him out there, you're going to see the exciting things that those of us that have watched, all of his games really got excited about.
By the way, speaking of Ian Frey, I just looked at Twitter and there's a video of him training with the first team. So he's, for all intents and purposes, back and playing healthy with the first team squad now. And he looks okay. He looks quite good.
Yeah, just FYI, as we are recording this, Inter Miami is having an open practice for the season ticket holders at night. And so there's lots of videos and updates coming out from that as we're live. So we might mention that a few more times in this episode. We will and probably should do a better breakdown of what Ian Freire's game really is. And maybe we will do that as he gets closer to becoming an important piece for this team. But I can just tell you he's a really exciting young player, and that comes with all the goods and bads of a young, exciting prospect. Let's talk about the long term. Inter Miami, we did a whole podcast on what Inter Miami might do in the summer window. We talked about how they could have the possibility of adding another DP level player. We talked about how bringing in a center back might be, the most obvious decision. We did speculate on some names, but that was mostly just for fun.
Harry Maguire.
That name was mentioned. I don't know if we were speculating that might be an addition for this team, but it still feels like a center back is the priority, and I don't think this changes that other than just the urgency for it to have to be a center back. Inter Miami has one senior roster spot available, so they could bring in that DP. They would have to buy down Campana in order to make it a DP, but there are ways to make that happen. And so it's totally feasible that they could bring in a center back in the summer. Now, because of Freire, if they do put him on season-ending injury list, which last season they didn't do for a couple players with serious injuries. They didn't do that for Gregory, who did end up making it back. And so, but this feels like it's definitely leading there. They didn't mention that. They mentioned it in the official release that it's probably season-ending injury. So they still have to pull that trigger, but that should allow them to replace him with a player of the same cap charge. He was making 1.1 million, something like that, on loan, but that was his salary. And so Inter Miami should be able to bring a player in that is the same cap charge. They also should be able to use the international spot that he was taking up and the senior roster slot. So they already had the opportunity to bring in a center back. This just makes it feel like an obvious something you have to do. Is that what you're expecting?
Yeah, I think we, at least on personal preference, we both wanted another center back just to shore up that defense, especially when it wasn't looking as good as it had in the recent games. So that was an eventuality that was going to happen anyways over the summer, that we expected a center back to come in, whether it would be a DP level or whether it would be someone similar to Freire's abilities. That was still a question. That is still a question. But now with this injury, I think it's imperative. Again, it begs the question still remains whether we want to bring in a DP superstar level center back, which I'm not sure there's a name out there that we'd potentially go for, or we want to put Nico Freire on the injury list and then have a direct replacement for him. Those are some questions that need to be answered still. I would assume that given the fact that we still have a month and a half before the summer window starts, the management would give Nico Freire time to see how bad the injury actually is and how his recovery progresses. I fully expect him to be out for the season, as you've already mentioned. So I don't think that's going to be I doubt that's going to be a
they're going to have to make all those decisions before they see anything from his recovery.
So for me, at the end of the day, it's all going to be about what kind of player they want to bring in. And for me, defense is definitely going to be one of the areas that they need to fill up very quickly.
You mentioned that, and all of a sudden I went on Twitter on my other screen, and I'm just inundated with these videos of Ian Freire, and I'm getting distracted by them. So yeah, I agree with you. And the reason why I mentioned that they probably were going to bring in a center back anyways implies that they were already probably scouting and looking at guys that could be real options, maybe having a few conversations. And so I don't think that this was sprung on them, that this might be important just over the past 48 hours. This is something that they probably were preparing for months now. And so I think that they're not starting from ground zero. As far as replacing him directly and using the season-ending injury list to get his cap charge, a replacement player for his cap charge, I mentioned that because he's making a substantial salary, which means you will have significant options to replace him with. If he was making a quarter of what he was making, it would be very difficult to find a quality player at that price point. But because he's making over $1 million, it should be a lot more feasible to bring in a quality player to replace him without having to use that last DP spot or anything of the like.
And I think that'll be a big consideration for them as well. If he was in a lower salary cap, then maybe they would have been like, let's keep him on the squad, see how his injury progresses. Maybe towards the end of the season, he can make a push for the playoffs. But this, considering how much he's making, this might be a consideration that they actually keep in mind while making all these decisions.
Yeah, and again, we are 5 months away from the playoffs. It's just not happening. Realistically, he's going to get put on the season-ending injury list when they have another player to replace him with. So expect that to happen. Nico Freire, over 5 clearances per 90, over 1 block shot per 90, almost 2 interceptions per 90, and just under 1 tackle per 90. Really solid defensive stats, and I think his presence was really starting to show over the last couple of weeks. So terrible news for the player. Quite poor news for Inter Miami because of how good he was looking. But it feels like there are at least options on the roster that are going to get us through the immediate future. Some exciting options for the midterm, and then the possibility to add someone that could be really exciting moving forward. Anything else on Nico Freire or the center back situation?
Just a question in terms of, and very briefly, do you think it's going to affect our playing style, at least in the medium term? Do you think we're going to start to see the issues that we'd seen earlier in the season, or do you think it's more than just the defense and the fact that we have someone like Redondo who's a little bit more defensive minded might provide a bit of cover for Christoph when he comes on?
Christoph and Ian Frey, who I think are going to be the 2 players that are going to get the most minutes out of this situation, are both significantly better offensive players than Nico Freire, especially Ian Frey. He's the best center back we have on the ball, period. So offensively, it might, we might have fewer turnovers. We might be more exciting, and you might get a little bit more from that back line. Sir Christoph likes to put those balls over the top. We haven't seen a ton of that in recent weeks. And Ian Frey just loves to bring the ball into the midfield and be a playmaker. Okay. Anyways, so offensively, I think it could be interesting. Defensively, we'll see. I want to talk about Leo Campana too. He got the game-winning goal on Saturday night, and that was very exciting. And it was about the only exciting thing that happened in that game. It's not the first time he's had a clutch goal, and I was watching through some of his, goals and highlights from his time at Inter Miami, and it was a lot of fun. And there were some really impressive goals.
He only scores bangers.
Yeah, that goal against Atlanta last season, when he sort of gets a rebound, flicks it over Miles Robinson, who's one of the best defenders in MLS, and then just kicks it off the volley, and it was incredible. It's a long distance goal against Orlando City. Some really impressive goals, and the goal that really stood out to me was that that second goal in the U.S. Open Cup semifinal last season, where Messi put a perfect ball in, but Campana gets the goal in the 98th minute to send us into extra time, and we eventually win that game. One of my favorite moments as an Inter Miami fan, and so I am very biased towards Leo Campana. I will openly admit that from the top. With that said, we haven't seen him play a lot this season, and Luis Suarez has been great, granted, significantly better than either José Martinez was last year or Higuaín, especially in that first half of the year before. But we haven't seen him a lot, and so my question is, does Tata not like this player, or is it just a matter of circumstance?
There are 2 aspects to this. Thank you, guys. Very kind of you. There are 2 aspects to this, right? You can't possibly expect to not play Luis Suarez when he's fit and he's firing and he's playing the way he is. So for me, Luis Suarez will be one of the first name on team sheets after Lionel Messi. Just by the form that he is, what he brings to the team, he's an absolutely game-changing machine. So that automatically cuts down Leo Campana's playing time, because he's now playing second fiddle to Luis Suarez, who's one of the best strikers in the modern game. Second aspect of this is Tata Martino is notorious for not knowing how to manage player minutes and not knowing how to make the most of his substitutes. And for me, that's where Leo Campana is suffering. He would have got a lot more playing time if Tata Martino would take Luis Suarez off in the 60th minute, bring Leo Campana on, and treat him as that high-quality second striker that we know that he really is. He could play alongside Luis Suarez. That's something that we haven't seen enough this season. There are a lot of ways in which you can incorporate Leo Campana despite Luis Suarez being your main striker. So for me, I don't think it's the fact that Tata Martino hates Leo Campana. That maybe is too strong a word to use. But it's just Leo Campana is suffering from the fact that Tata Martino is not the best in terms of changing things up, is not the best in terms of utilizing the players off the bench in the most optimum manner that would bring the best out of them. And for me, I think that's the biggest issue that Leo Campana is facing this season.
Yeah, and in Tata's defense, Leo Campana has only been a healthy, unused substitute twice all season. He has played in 13 games. Has missed a couple games with injury, so he's been used, but we've oftentimes seen him come on in the 88th minute and not be given a real role or a real chance to do anything. And listen, Campana is 23. He's not 19. And so he does need real minutes to continue to grow and improve as a striker. Granted, he's, I'm sure, getting a lot of off the field benefit from being around Luis Suarez. But I guess what Saturday showed us, though, is that he can be an impact player if given the opportunity. And he does provide something that Luis Suarez doesn't. He is pressing from the front. He does run around a lot. He does help in set pieces, especially defensive. But also he can hit a header off a corner, or if you need a goal, you can launch balls into him and he can produce. And we've seen that plenty of times from him at Inter Miami. And not to let anyone forget, he is still the second highest goal scorer in Inter Miami history, right? This is not just somebody that we picked up off the streets.
He's more of a target man than Luis Suarez.
He is. And so Saturday night, it felt like we were desperate for a target man, and Campana was not given an opportunity until we got lucky to get a fourth substitution window. So what do we do about this? What would you like to see us do about this?
I think there needs to be a consistent plan in how we use Leo Campana. Bringing him on in the 90th minute when you've potentially used up all your substitution windows before this and your team's 0-0 doesn't send a good signal to the player and to the team. So for me, don't ever do that again. It's okay to bring him on from time to time in the 80th minute. And depending on the needs of the game as well, you got to change up your substitutes. I'm not saying bring him on in the 55th to the 60th minute every single game. But this is a player who can actually make an impact if he's in rhythm. And he's only going to be in rhythm if he plays more than 5 minutes towards the end of the game. He needs at least 15, 20 minutes week in, week out of every other game. So for me, managing his minutes and trying to maybe work out a structure where Leo Campana fits into this team a lot better, much like Yannick Bright and the plan that the team is utilizing with Yannick Bright. Something similar to that. Have an idea in how you want to use Leo Campana rather than just throw him on to the field in like the last 5 minutes and hope for him to do the best. That being said, it's unfortunate that he's competing with such a brilliant player like Suarez, and I don't see Suarez tapering off in form anytime soon. But it's just a pleasure to have a striker who's second fiddle on any other team who would be potentially their starting striker.
Yeah, and if you go back to last season, once Lionel Messi had that calf strain and he missed a couple games, Leo Campana was the best player, and he was the reason we won games or were competitive in games during that stretch of like 3 or 4 weeks. I'm thinking about that Sporting Kansas City game last year, which he won single-handedly for us. I guess the first thing I want Tata to have in his head is that you can play these two players on the field together and not lose your structure entirely. And that doesn't mean for 90 minutes, but it does mean that, for 30 minutes, you don't have to play Leo Alfonso as a runaround winger. You can have two strikers and have Messi as a floating, and then let the rest of your team be solid structurally going the other way. And that can work. Or at least I think it can work, and it works on paper. And so we should get a chance to see that and see what it looks like. It does feel like Tata Martino, since he got here, has been a little hesitant to put Campana and Lionel Messi on the field together. Oftentimes we see, especially last season, we saw Campana come off when Messi came on, and that was the majority. Like, they didn't, even if they played in the same game, they didn't play on the field at the same time together. And so there wasn't a real opportunity to build serious chemistry. And the few times we did see it, it was really nice, like that US Open Cup semifinal that I mentioned. Granted, Suarez is a better player, and so I don't want to that has to be stated, but it just feels like there's more minutes for Campana than he's getting. And we have to remember, this is a player that's on a DP contract. This is the third highest cap charge player on your team, give or take. And so he's a player that you should be using, and he has the talent to deserve it. Do you think there's a chance we see him Saturday night as a starter against Vancouver? And let me just remind you, we play 3 games in 8 days starting Saturday. The next 2 games against Atlanta and against St. Louis City are both at home, and so you'd think easier opportunities to get 3 points. And then lastly, this game against Vancouver is an 8-hour trip, and it's a lot of travel involved and a lot of, all of that kind of baggage that comes with these long trips. Do you think we might see Campana start on Saturday, especially after that goal this past weekend?
I would say he probably deserves a start. That wasn't a goal that he scored. That was a golazo that he scored. That was a beautiful, beautiful goal. Yeah, I think he needs to start. Luis Suarez has looked a little bit out of sorts. Did he score the game before the Orlando game? I think he did. He did.
Against Montreal? Yeah, he did.
He just
off a corner.
Always gets goals. So it's not even like you can take him off the field. But I wouldn't be surprised if I'll put it this way. I would not be surprised if Leo Campana gets a start against Vancouver, because we're playing a lot of games in the coming weeks. We are playing on a semi-artificial turf. And I think, given the fact that Leo Campana ended that game on such a high, maybe warrants a start in this particular game. There was plenty of gumption behind that shot, I'll be honest.
I would love to see if Lionel Messi doesn't start this game. And we have no real reason to assume that he wouldn't. But it is a long journey, and it's on turf, and he wants to make sure he's healthy for the Copa America and all of those things. So if he doesn't start this game, or if he doesn't make the trip, I want those two to start up top together in some sort of formation that keeps those two on the field together at the same time to see what they can do together. They are lefty-righty. Actually, Suarez might also be a lefty, but it just feels like those two would be able to combine really well. Granted, the only time we saw it this year, it didn't look great.
4-4-2 or 4-3-1-2? What kind of formation are you thinking they would employ? With Christoph out,
I would like to see a 4-4-2 where we get the back five. We'd expect Gressel as a right midfielder, which I think is his best position.
Yeah,
and then probably either Rojas or Taylor on the left. Probably Rojas on the left side, and then Kremaski and unless Redondo's ready, Kremaski and Sergio Busquets in the midfield.
Or 4-2-2-2.
However it ends up playing, 4-4-2, 4-2-2, 4-2-2.
I will say this though, speaking of formations, and not to digress from the topic, but I do want to see Tata experiment a little bit more in the coming games, especially when we lose out Lionel Messi, to try and see how we can get the best out of some of these players, because we've sort of stagnated in this 4-3-3, especially when Lionel Messi is not there, and we got players who can play multiple positions. So for me, I think it'd be great as a fan to see a few different formations here and there. Not the 3-5-2, please. That's not what I'm advocating. Something in the back four, a different formation that maybe utilizes someone like Gresso on the right wing side, or the right midfield side, and Rojas maybe being a floating midfielder or even a false nine. And I think once Messi's out, that would be the perfect chance to experiment with some of these formations. Sorry, just wanted to put that out there before we go back to talk about Campana.
Yeah, and especially even if it's for 20 minutes at a time, I would love to see us experiment with a few things. And by the way, I want to give Tata credit because he did do that in this last game by putting Robert Taylor at the left wing spot and moving Matthias Rojas to the 10 and having 2 6s behind him. I thought that was really interesting to see, and I like that he did that. Even though it didn't work out, I still like that he tried it, and so I want to give him credit for that. But going back to Campana, do you think he has? And I hate to speculate like this, A, because he's one of my favorite players, but B, because I don't want to speculate about anyone having life-changing circumstances sort of willy-nilly. But do you think that he's going to be on this team beyond the summer, or do you think that that's a real concern? Chris Henderson was very clear last summer when we brought in Messi and Alba and the 3 U22 DPs and Busquets that Campana was still a fundamental part of the future of this team and a key player for them. But then we got Luis Suarez, and it doesn't feel like Tata Martino has prioritized Campana's growth and development as a player. And so you have to wonder if that changes. He would be a trade asset that would fetch significant return. I hate to even talk about it, but do you think that's not just realistic, but do you think that's likely, or do you think that they're going to try and do everything they can to keep this player?
For me, the plan for Leo Campana needs to be in place right now. If he is to be the future of your attack, if he is supposed to be the striker for this team in the future, they need to prioritize it right now. Luis Suarez is potentially not going to be here next season. Once the season ends, we don't know whether he's going to continue to play or not. Even if he does continue, I'm not sure he's going to be at the same level or able to sustain the numbers. So if the plan is for Leo Campana to eventually take over that striker position, that number 9 position, that plan needs to start happening right now. Develop him and give him minutes to be able to then build on into that primary striker role. If that's not the plan and we plan to bring in another striker, then I think Leo Campana is too good to be a secondary striker in this team.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You mean for next season?
Yes, for next season. The plan in place needs to be right now.
Here's my question. If you don't have Suarez guaranteed for next season, I don't know how you can move Leo Campana, because he's technically a DP, but he's not a max, he's not above the max TAM. You could buy him down. They only have him as a DP because of the U22 rule that they needed up until now. He still feels like he could be the centerpiece of your future.
Yeah, I don't think he leaves in the summer. That decision needs to happen in the transfer window after this one.
But if you get Suarez to commit to coming back for another season in Miami, then all of a sudden, by the end of that season, Campana is 25, and he has never gotten a chance to be the guy. And it feels like, even for Campana's sake, he's not getting the development and career trajectory that he probably signed up for. And listen, I don't have any reason to think that he's not entirely happy with his situation. So I'm sure he is. But at some point, you have to prioritize this player as like a fundamental part of your team. And it feels like as long as Tata and Suarez are here, that's not really going to happen.
I do still think that even if Luis Suarez commits to a second season, you don't necessarily know whether Suarez is going to be the primary striker in that second season. For all you know, he could have an eventual drop-off, which would mean that he becomes the secondary off-the-bench striker. You don't know what his fitness looks like in another 6 months, in another year. Again, this is all speculation, and we're all trying to figure out what the role for Campana is. But I completely agree with you. This is a player who's too good to be a secondary striker in this team. And if you don't have a plan for him, if you don't have a developmental strategy for his career, I think he's better off somewhere else, as much as it hurts for me to say that.
There's a good point from Francisco that Tata has been replacing virtually every player that was here before he arrived. That is true. Drake Callender and Robert Taylor have been the only two sort of really consistent players that have been here since pre-Tata, other than the youth players. But Campana, when he arrived, was 22 and was part of that really young core. He's also South American. A lot of the players that we've moved on have either been from Europe or just were more Phil Neville players, or more importantly, didn't live up to what they were expected to live up to. So you can see both ways how, yes, this isn't a player that Tata Martino really wanted to bring in. This was a Phil Neville / Chris Henderson signing, but also he fits a lot of the metrics that you would really want, or that Tata has really gone for, young South American players. He fits the mold just like Diego Gomez and Redondo and Facu Farias and Toto Aviles. He fits the same mold as all of those guys. And again, I want to give Tata a little bit of remittance because he has played him all but 2 games that he was healthy for. So it's not like he's completely ignored him. He does seem like a priority to get him game time, even if it is only a few minutes at the end of the game. So I don't know. I think this is a conversation that's going to be very interesting to track, and maybe that goal will give Campana a little bit of boost and get him a little bit more run. And I would love to see that. So.
Yeah, one last thing in Campana. I know fans complain, and I've complained a lot about his consistency, but consistency only comes when you get minutes on the pitch. So it's sort of the chicken and an egg situation. You can't really complain about a player's consistency when he's not being used regularly or is not getting enough minutes. So I personally think that this is a player that likes to play in rhythm, and when he gets the opportunities regularly, he will start scoring goals. And you've mentioned this, he scores goals in bunches. So once he has that consistency for playing time, I think the goals are going to start to flow. Maybe wrong, but that's personally my opinion. And I think he needs to be utilized a little bit better in terms of how he's being used thus far.
Yeah, and Campana does things that Suarez doesn't, right? It's not like if he doesn't score, there are strikers that if they don't score, then what do they even do? Campana does press. He is a big body on defensive set pieces, and
he occupies space.
He occupies space. Without Freire on the field, he's probably the most physical player we have, just off the top of my head. And so, and then also he's a different type of striker than Suarez, and so you have to get to a point where if you're trying to get Campana goals, you have to play differently. You want to play for set pieces. You want to play for corners. You want to put balls into the box, and you want to get into positions where you can make that final cross in, because he'll be there for the tap-ins, right? He can be that type of player. He's not going to do what Suarez does, where he's going to dribble through 2 players and contort his body and do just world-class things. And it also isn't going to create like Suarez, but he's still a very technical player that is, he's just a good MLS striker. And there's no other way to put that.
For sure.
Anything else on Campana before we move on to talk about this Vancouver game for 5 minutes before we wrap it up?
Yeah, a couple of more goals like that would definitely make me a even bigger fan of Campana than he actually is. So hopefully keep it not for the 97th minute, maybe score it in the 85th minute. That would be easier on the heart, but just keep doing what you do, man. He's a great player, and I hope he gets more opportunities.
Yeah, and last Saturday night's goal was not his most clutch goal for Inter Miami, and it was not his most impressive goal for Inter Miami. It's, top 5.
That's saying something.
Right? Yeah, Okay, Vancouver, we talked about it with Campana. Will he start? But what are you expecting from the starting lineup? Just general thoughts before we wrap it up. We talked about maybe Christoph stepping into the center back partnership with Aviles, just because Freire is out, Callender in goal, left back, right back, Cello and Alba. From there, though, what are you expecting?
I think midfield is going to be similar. I don't think Tata is going to change the midfield, especially now that we've had a week's layoff. Sergio Busquets going to be our playmaker 6, Gressel again for the 1000th time this season, and then Kremaski. I don't expect there to be much of a change. What I will say is that we're going to see Redondo. Actually, no, Maybe not this game. I expect to see Redondo, but I won't be surprised if he's not used because the journey is quite far. So I do definitely expect to see Redondo in the Atlanta game, but maybe this is against Vancouver. It's a bit of an if. Messi, I'm not sure. If I'm a betting man, I will say Messi plays. So for me, the front line doesn't change. I think he's going to go with Matas Rojas, Suarez, and Lionel Messi. That for me is going to be the similar lineup as against as in the last game, with Kristoff out, and that's probably going to be the only change.
Yeah, probably. Gressel is definitely going to start. He was with Vancouver for a while, and in fact, last season at this time, he was with Vancouver. And in fact, some of my favorite Gressel moments ever with him came with Vancouver, where you could watch him be the best player on the team for them, and whipping in nice crosses and great on set pieces. And just thinking about it, it reminds you that there's a lot of things that he would do for a different MLS team that he just doesn't get the opportunity to do for this team, because you're not going to put him on set piece opportunities when you have Messi and even Rojo. Like, he's down the list for these things. And so, but definitely playing against his old team, I'm sure he'll start. Yeah, Kremasky Ruiz feels like maybe a toss-up, but probably Kremasky just for consistency's sake. I don't know about Redondo. I think it would be really exciting if we get Redondo. It would be really exciting if we got Ian Frey later, in the second half, 10, 15-minute cameo. But the other thing to remember is this is a West Coast game. It's a Western Conference team. It's not a 6-point swing, whoever wins. And so while Inter Miami wants to go out and win this game, especially after the long travel, it doesn't feel like as important as the next two games after, or at least the next game after against Atlanta. So I just feel like this might be the game we get some rotation. But we'll see. Tata Martino and the club are doing an open night training tonight, and so maybe he'll answer some questions after the game, and we'll get a little bit more of a sense of what to expect. But yeah, what about Vancouver? Are you excited? They're a solid team. They haven't been phenomenal lately, but they're a good team. They have some good players.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough opposition, especially when you're playing away from home. MLS is never easy when you're playing away from home. Going to a different country, essentially 8-hour flight. I don't expect our players to be absolutely fresh for this game. And our form has been a little bit iffy in the final third. We haven't scored that many goals in the last couple of games, just the one. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of team shows up, because we're definitely not going to be as defensively sound as we were in the last few games. So it potentially means we're going to have to score more goals than them. And I won't be surprised if we come out of this one with no points. So it'll be a tough game. It'll be definitely a tough game.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we did a podcast on the 7-game stretch between that point and when Messi's going to leave for Copa America. And I thought this was the toughest game on the schedule. It is a road game against a solid team. This is probably the most exciting thing that's happened in Vancouver soccer in quite some time, since Bayern Munich wanted Alphonso Davies, maybe. I don't know. But that's assuming Messi travels. I'm really curious about something regarding rotation. Tata Martino mentioned after Saturday's game that the guys were tired after playing 3 games in 8 days, and they get this week off, a full week, but then they're going to do it again. And I'm really interested to see if Tata learns from that and gives them more of an opportunity to rotate and rest and plays guys 60 minutes, or gets Campana in the starting lineup, Franco Negri in the starting lineup, Noah Allen maybe in the starting lineup, David Ruiz, Sunderland, Yannick Bright, right? I would love to see a Yannick Bright start over the next 3 games, but I'm just hoping he does a little bit more rotation, because if the guys are going to get tired and they're not going to get win after win after win, then there's no reason to start the same 11 every week or every game.
Yeah, knowing Tata, he's going to make one change. Kristoff. And that's it. I will bet my house that Gressel starts every single game for the next 15 games.
Yeah, well, no one's going to take that bet, because that would just be free money for you. Anything else before we wrap it up tonight?
No, I think this was a bit of a somber episode given the news that we just received. So just wanted to put things in perspective. There's a few Yeah, a few new changes will happen in the coming games with Nico Freire out, and I'm sure the team's going to struggle a little bit, but hopefully it's not going to be too much of a drop off with some of the players returning from injury, with Ian Frey and Redondo coming back. So there's some silver lining to the dark clouds, but let's hope all things stay positive.
Yeah, just checking Twitter before we sign off. Lots of videos of Redondo and Ian Frey chatting or training with the team and looking healthy and ready to go. So I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see either of them on Saturday night. I definitely think we'll see them over the next week and a half with all these games. But other than that, guys, it was a lot of fun. This was our midweek episode, so we will be back Saturday pregame for the pregame show 1 hour before kickoff. It is going to be later than normal. I believe that game's at 10:30 Eastern time, so we'll get on at 9:30 Eastern, and we'll go from there. But we enjoyed it. We hope to see you guys for the pregame show, and have a wonderful night.